Hey guys, this is Tyler with Righteous Gaming. Thanks for taking time to watch my video. I really appreciate it. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Our next goal is to get 1,000 subscribers. And if you're not already, please join our Discord. It is a place where you can talk about Flesh and Blood, we talk about the market, we talk about the meta, and I do some fun sales and giveaways. For instance, until the end of the weekend, you can enter to win one of these Liberty Bell metal fab tokens that were exclusive to Worlds in Philadelphia this year. So our giveaway is going to end on Sunday, and I'm giving 2 of these away to people that put a certain emoji on the post. And so if you're not in our Discord, make sure to join it, and you could be entered to win one of those 2 Liberty Bell tokens. All right. So today's topic is going to be about reprints. It's all anyone seems to be talking about right now. There are lots of generic reprints coming up in the next set for Flesh and Blood, Compendium of Wraith. We got lots of legendary reprints. We got majestic reprints. We got reprints in alternate arts, fancy versions, extended art, rainbow foils, non-foils, special borders. There's a lot going on. And a lot of people that I see have very strong opinions one way or the other on reprints. And the funny thing is, the community isn't even united on their strong opinions. Some people love them, some people hate them, some people hate them for completely opposite reasons, some people love them for completely opposite reasons. It's just so much to process. So today I'm going to do my best to try to clarify some things that we need to clarify when it comes to reprints. We're going to try to explain from my perspective, from a vendor's perspective, the good and the bad for reprints, people that are positively affected by this, people who are negatively affected by this, and how we can move forward as a community so that we can all continue to enjoy Flesh and Blood. But before I start, I want to talk about a lot of the complaining that I see online from people when it comes to the reprints. I think that all the complaining just kind of needs to stop. There's a lot of people that are upset about the reprints one way or the other, and honestly, complaining isn't that great of a look. Either adjust to what's happening in the Flesh and Blood world, or maybe it's time for you to see yourselves out of the community as well if you're really upset about it and you feel betrayed. And so I just had to say that from a vendor perspective. I think that it's just best that we all move on and adjust and adapt to this new environment that we're facing in Flesh and Blood. So next, I want to talk about the reprints and different groups of people in the Flesh and Blood ecosystem and how they're differently affected by the reprints. And so first, I want to talk about collectors. There are many different levels of collectors. There are collectors who play the game. There are collectors who don't play the game. There are collectors who like to collect the early stuff. There's collectors who like to collect the more modern stuff, the rare stuff. And then there's anyone in between. So first I want to talk about the collectors that don't really play the game. And so a lot of these collectors have been in since the beginning. They're older collectors. They like to collect the older cards, the older arts. And so a lot of this stuff is going down in price. One possible reason is because of the reprints. One possible reason is also because these cards are overinflated in price. Back during the game launched in 2019, and then during its first year experienced the COVID boom of the collectible phase. For those of you that weren't here, it was crazy. Boxes of alpha went from $100 up to like $3,000. Cards were getting crazy in prices. You had these colorful legendaries from Alpha and Arc First that were rising above $2,000. Now they're back down to about $800. And so there's just a lot going on in the Flesh and Blood market. And it priced out a lot of players. A lot of the early collectors jumped in the market, bought up a lot of the inventory. And as that inventory is coming back to the market, it's finding itself harder to find homes for these cards. And so the prices have been going down. However, I think that this is still going to happen regardless of if they're reprints or not. I mean, these cards that went up in price a lot in the early days of Flesh and Blood, they still haven't retraced back to the normal levels of what they should have been. Those cards should never have been priced that high. These boxes of Alpha and Arc First should never have been priced this high. And so I think we're still going to experience retracement on this. I think we're also learning a lot about the market's all based on playability. So early cards that aren't playable right now are definitely going to go down in price as well. And so I just think that a lot of the frustrations that I've seen from the OG collectors aren't really aren't really fair to the game right now, because these are cards that would have gone down in price anyway. And so I still think they have a ways to go down before before we hit the where the prices should be at all along. And so I think that if you are a collector that was in since the beginning, I think you can still expect some of those early pieces to go down in price. However, the good news is the game is growing, the player base is growing, 20% year over year growth. And so even though we haven't hit the bottom yet, I think that a lot of these older cards are long term holds, and they're going to be solid pieces to have in the future. But then there's also the collectors that are the players. The collectors that are the players kind of have a better idea of what's playable, what's not. They're moving into some of the more modern, high-end pieces, and these are a lot of the pieces that I see are going to be holding their prices pretty well. There's going to be some room for growth. You know, I mean, look at like Marvel CNC. CNC was reprinted once before in the Hunted, and Marvel CNC's price didn't really get affected at all. In fact, it's still going up in price a little bit. And then you have some of the cold foils as well will go up in price. The extended arts from sets like the Hunted, from Rosetta, are still seeing decent growth. They're still holding their value, and so I don't think that a lot of these reprints are going to make the value of the higher chase cards. It's not going to affect those prices a whole lot. Next, I want to talk about investors. Investors are not the primary target for LSS. Investors are people who only intend to profit from the game. A lot of the main way that investors do this is by collecting sealed boxes of Flesh and Blood. However, we know that sealed boxes of Flesh and Blood are not good at all. There's not been much growth on any sealed boxes really, and we haven't seen the type of games and sealed boxes for Flesh and Blood that we've seen in other games. The main reason for this is that the boxes usually are for specific heroes, classes. They rotate out, cards become unplayable again, and now the reprints are affecting sealed boxes from the past. To me, that's not really that big of a deal. If the sealed boxes in Flesh and Blood's past don't have a ton of value, there's not a lot of people collecting them, so there's not a lot of people burned by the fact that those boxes aren't increasing in value. And keeping them cheap actually allows for players to go back and redraft them for the sets that are draftable. And so honestly, not that big of a deal that older boxes don't stay valuable, because people aren't really hoarding them. Most people aren't really hoarding them anyway. But for the investors out there is money to be made in Flesh and Blood, but you gotta know what's good. You gotta know what's playable. You gotta know when to buy, when to sell. You can't just hold things forever and expect them to go up in price, because this is a player's game. It's a player's market. And in order to make money investing in Flesh and Blood, you have to be an active member of the community. And so this is why there's not a lot of investors in the game, because most investors like to be more passive, like to just sit and let their things accrue in value. And honestly, if you're wanting to invest in a card game, Flesh and Blood's not the best game to invest in. Like, most other games are better to invest in. One Piece is hot right now. Magic is decent. Pokemon is always good. It's the gold standard of games to invest in. And so not going to spend much more time on investors, but their opinions of investors are not the primary target when looking at the market and whether it's good or not to reprint cards for. But since we're looking at the good and the bad of reprints, along with collectors, investors are is not great for them. Not great for them. However, along with collectors too, there's not a ton in there that, especially that don't play the game, and so is reprints being bad for collectors and investors going to hurt the overall ecosystem of Flesh and Blood? Not a lot. So and so I can imagine that when LSS is looking at weighing the pros and cons of reprinting all these cards, that considering the collectors and investors isn't high up on their priority list, because there's not enough of them to really affect the market in a meaningful way. I know that's going to be controversial to some people out there, but it's how I feel. It is what it is. I'm willing to listen to feedback in the comments if you think otherwise, though. Next is players. There's three main tiers of players, all of which are impacted differently by the reprints. The first tier is the core players. These are the players that are heavily invested in Flesh and Blood. They're going to major tournaments. They're going to multiple callings a year. They're playing weekly at their LGSs, maybe 2, 3, 4 times a week at their LGSs. They have a pretty sizable Flesh and Blood collection. Some of these are going to be collectors that have highest rarities of a lot of things, at least one max rarity deck or close to max rarity. Some do lowest rarity. Some aren't major collectors, but they just want to either have a playset of all the cards or playset of their favorite classes or all the generics. The people that do the lowest rarity and are core players, I think, are going to get hurt the most by the reprints. If you were to take a look at all of the market values of the cards that got reprinted in Super Slam, Flesh and Blood's latest set, and if a player was to have a single playset non-foil or the lowest rarity of all of the cards that got reprinted, their collection would have lost $500 in value. Now, some people online say they don't care about their collection losing value as long as new players are getting into the game, or cards shouldn't have value anyway, so it doesn't matter if people are losing money. But honestly, that's not a great way to look at it. Players do spend money in the game. They do spend money to buy cards, and when their collection loses value, it hurts the majority of players. And so to say that it doesn't matter that people are losing money when these cards are getting reprinted is pretty insensitive, and it's not a nice way of looking at it. Just me as a vendor, I obviously have multiple play sets of all the cards, and just from Super Slam I lost over $3,000 in value into my inventory. And so although people can now access the cards for cheaper, the people who bought in before the reprints at the higher prices still have a right to feel a little bit burned. And so it doesn't hurt when you lose money, even if it's not actual cash on hand that you have. I remember there are people in Kansas City, the call in Kansas City. This is about a couple weeks before reprint of Felling and Plow Wonder were announced, maybe a month before. People were buying. I sold a couple play sets of Felling and Plow Wonder. $150 plus for a set of Fellings, and $35-$40 each for plows. And so you're looking at over $250 worth of cards that are now worth $30. That's a hard ask for someone to spend $250 on 6 cards and a month later have them be worth $30. That's going to leave negative feelings in people's minds, and they're going to remember that. And it's going to make them think twice about purchasing more expensive cards in the future. And so I think that you're going to see a lot of this sentiment with the core players that own these cards. However, the good news is that the core players are the most forgiving players. They're the players that will likely stay in the game no matter what. A few players may leave and go play other games or sell out their collection or whatever, but most of these core players are very forgiving. In Flesh and Blood, we have a very awesome community, a very nice community. And so although it stinks to have your collection go down in price, a lot of people see the benefits of cards getting reprinted and are more forgiving towards this. I'm very forgiving towards it because I know that in the future more players will be able to get into the game. So I'm personally willing to take a inventory value hit if it means more players getting into the game. However, in the short term, it doesn't feel great. It stings a little bit, and it's a big ask to have players be willing to lose value in their collection so that new players can get into the game, which is essentially what LSS is doing. However, the core players that have more of the higher rarity stuff, we're seeing that with the reprints, the more higher rarity stuff isn't going down in price as much. So Crown of Dominion, for example, is getting reprinted. The Marvel version of it's not, in my opinion, is not going to get affected as much with the price. And so players that have that are more collectors too, that have the highest rarity, aren't going to be affected as much as the players who do lowest rarity. And so it's not as big of an ask for the player collectors who are part of the core group for the reprints, as well as a lot of these core players are shifting their focus on what is in their collections these days. There's a lot of consolidation happening, which I'm going to be talking about in the future and later on in this video. So the next group is casual players. Casual players are the largest segment of the Flesh and Blood ecosystem, and in my opinion are the most important segment. They're the backbone of the market, since there's the majority of them. There's a lot of players who play Flesh and Blood that are not core players. They don't travel to all the events, that aren't trying to be as competitive as possible. And a lot of these casual players can be collectors that have higher value collections. And then they have the giant. This is the group of players with the highest range. And so you can have casual players with very expensive collections with a lot of high-end cards, and you can have casual players with one deck that they're focusing on. And so there's a wide variety of players that fall into this group. And so these are players that maybe attend one big event a year. They like to do side events. They play their armories a couple times a week. They're more active locally than on the competitive scene. So the reason why I say this is the most important segment is that this is the group of players that spend the most money, where most of the market share comes from. A lot of the majority of cards are sold to players in this category, so they help prop up the market, especially of the core players. They help keep value in the market, and so the different wings of this group are going to be affected differently by the reprints. So this is gonna for the higher value collection amongst the casual players, they're not going to be affected as much as I talked about amongst the core players. But on the lower end, they're either going to be affected a lot or not, and be affected bad by it, or they're going to be affected good by it. And so on the good side, this is going to lead these casual players to have a pathway to become core players, to grow in their collection, to grow in their competitiveness, and gives them the ability to go to more events, gives them more excitement to go to more events. A lot of these cards have been that are getting reprinted have been inaccessible for the more casual player that doesn't have a big collection, and so it allows them to be able to pick up these cards for cheaper so that they can become competitive. It feeds the pathway for them to be casual now in a core part of the player base in the future. And so for those players, it's great. For the players in this category that had maybe one or two decks, and they had, let's say they were only playing Florian and only had the Earth cards, and they just lost $250 of value, and that was their only deck that they had, it's going to hurt a lot for them, and there's a risk of losing those players completely because of this. However, I think that's not a large part of this group. The majority of this group is going to benefit from the reprints, and it's going to allow some players to become deeper entrenched into the game, which is what LSS wants. It's what stores want, and it's what players should want as well. They should want more players to be in the game. And so the casual group, it's a good or bad, but I think it's mostly good for them, with the few exceptions that I talked about. And finally, for new players, this is the most obvious category that it's good for. Having the game be cheaper to enter allows more players the ability to enter the game. It's not the best signal to tell new players that the game is getting cheaper, though. They may worry about the value of their cards as they're buying in. However, it does allow the pathway from someone who's not playing Flesh and Blood to a casual player and then to a core player. It allows that pathway to be much more easier and accessible, and so that's very good. And I think that's great for the game, and it's great for the players. It's great for the events, makes the events bigger. It's great for everyone all around. So, finally, vendors and stores. It's hard for vendors and stores. Like I said, I lost $3,000 of inventory value from Super Slam from the reprints, and I'm curious to see how much value I'll be losing for Pen. Luckily, with Pen, we've been getting reprints slowly over the past month or two, 2 months since Worlds, and so we've been able to see greater into the future about what is really getting reprinted. We can assume most of the generic legendaries, so we've had more time to offload a lot of the cards that we've had in our inventory to help prepare for it. However, it still doesn't hurt. It still hurts stores and vendors because of the values going down on cards that we have as well that we're trying to sell. It means that we'll lose some money on some cards. But my mantra that I'm telling myself is that short-term pain leads to long-term gain. And so it'll hurt in the short term for vendors and stores. However, in the long term, we should see an increased player growth of players coming into the game. There'll be more players at events. There'll be more players at the local LGSs. And so over the long run, over the next couple of years, we'll be able to make back those losses and more from the influx of players that come into the game. And so given all of these different segments of the Flesh and Blood ecosystem, is it worth it for Flesh and Blood, considering all the pros and cons to reprint all of these staple cards? Is being good for new players, casual players, and new players and casual players? Is it worth it angering the collectors, some of the core players, some of the investors if they're still in? Is it worth it? At the end of the day, my answer is yes. LSS has to make a calculated decision on what's best for the game. Is it best to grow the game but make the cards cheaper, or is it best to keep the cards more expensive, more rare, have a smaller game, but have cards hold their value better? And so I firmly believe that it's better to get these cards more available in the market. People are going to be upset in the ecosystem whether they reprint cards or not. I'm seeing people be upset because they're reprinting cards in alternate art, because they're reprinting cards in extended art and foiling them. There's people getting upset because they're reprinted at all. There's people getting upset because they're not being reprinted enough. And they're not hitting the right cards, or they need to print more, And so, either side of the spectrum may fall on, people are upset. I think it's just silly, honestly. It's a net good for the game to have more players into the game. And the fact that they're not being printed more, some of these reprints are staying in Legendary, the Majestics, and moving up to Legendary. The fact that the cards aren't going to $1, $2, $5 each is actually a good thing. There's a happy medium that LSS has to find between completely tanking the value of cards and not affecting the price at all. And so they can't make everyone happy, and so they have to try to find a good middle ground here. So that's the last thing I want to talk about, is how should reprints be done. So we've established that reprints are overall good for the game, even though it's not good for everybody. So is it better to just go all out and print them in abundance, like Felling of the Crown and Plow Under, where the card tanks completely to $2? Or is it better to reprint cards like CNC and Tunic, where the card price doesn't get affected much at all, where instead of going down 95% of value, it only goes down 15-20% of value? I think that's more correct than it is just completely tanking the value of cards. Non-foil Majestics are cards that everyone needs 3 of in their deck. And so I think there's some sort of middle ground, but it's closer to the CNC Tunic reprint. Um, but maybe the CNC and Tunic wasn't reprinted enough to affect the card price. But reprinting them like Felling or Plow is too much. And so printing them again and again in more sets, I think, is a great idea. They're printing them in alternate arts, extended arts. They're allowing players to be able to open these cards again with the new boxes. And so I think it's just a great idea from LSS to keep them a little more rare in this set, making the cards be in legendary rarity instead of full on majestic like Felling and Plow, because it still retains some of the trust from the core players, from the players who have bought a lot value wise into the game. However, it does make cards cheaper and more accessible for newer players and casual players. And so I think to have it on either extreme, to have cards that are reprinted not lose any value, or having them lose all of their value, I think both extremes are wrong. But LSS has reprinted enough cards by now to know where that middle ground should be. And so I think that's their goal. Are they always going to hit that goal? I don't think so. But I think they're trying their best, honestly. I think they're trying their best to make all sides of the ecosystem happy. And then that's all I can ask from them is for them to do their best. And so I know that my hit and inventory value is going to be a net positive for the game, and I'm fine with that. And I think that if you guys are upset about the reprints or how they're reprinting cards, I think that honestly, your option is to adapt, or your option is to not engage as much with the game. So last thing I want to talk about is alternate arts, EA rainbow foils. I know that there are a lot of collectors out there that are upset that they're making more chase versions of cards, fancier versions. It appears, cards like CNC's getting alternate art, extended art. Tunic's getting alternate art, extended art. There's alternate art fables in this set. There's just a lot of stuff for players to chase. However, and a lot of collectors feel that this is the opposite of what LSS has promised in the past. Whether or not that's true, I think it's clearly sending a signal that we need to refocus as people who collect the game. And I'm a small collector myself, so if you care about the value of your collection, then I think the LSS is wanting us to refocus our ideas of what's collectible in Flesh and Blood. They have the cold foil reprint policy. They're not reprinting cards in cold foil that have come cold foil in the set. And so I think that's the first place to start. There are a lot of cards that are protected. Cold foil legendaries, cold foil majestics, marvels are a big one, cold foil fables. These are the things that LSS is wanting people to collect. And even if they're not holding as much of a premium over their rainbow foil or non-foil counterparts, I think this is shifting people's minds to chase these cold foils more, is going to lead that collectability gap price-wise is going to increase it. And so if you're a collector that is not feeling great about all these reprints, I think it's time to shift our mindset to what LSS is wanting to protect and wanting to be collectible. These extended arts, especially like EA Tunic, the Rainbow Foil Tunic, they never said the promo wasn't going to be reprinted. And if they did, I don't remember that. But also it's just a promo, so we can't expect them to not ever make a flashy version of a Tunic again, especially in extended art. And so this set tells us a lot about what LSS wants to do in the future. And so I think we need to adapt to that. Especially with the fables, everything is able to be touched. Everything is able to be reprinted. And so if you like your collection to hold value, there are certain things that you can pick up that will hold more value. Even the extended art like CNC is holding great value. The EA shelters are holding value. Like a lot of these cards are still holding value. Like shelter new art has been the reprint has been announced for a while, even getting reprinted in extended art. I can't keep EA shelters in stock. They sell immediately after I put them in the booth. The new heart gets announced on Saturday of the Columbus Calling, and on Sunday I sell 2 rainbow foil hearts out of my inventory. CNC got announced as a reprint, and I sold CNCs last weekend. Most of the cards that got announced as reprinted, I'm still selling, and so I think that there's enough of an appetite for these cards that players are going to scoop them up. Players are going to eat them up, and the dip on Compendium's not going to be as strong as I think a lot of players are fearing. And so that's just my opinion, though. It's just what I see from players wanting to buy into the game. There's not a lot of the older cards coming for sale, at least at events, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens to the market, what happens to the cards getting reprinted, which versions are more desirable. But overall, I think reprints are good for Flesh and Blood, even if they're not good for everyone within the market. Those that aren't it isn't as good for are more forgiving because they're more deeply entrenched into the game, and they care about the game and they just like the game because honestly, at the end of the day, Flesh and Blood is the best played card game out there. It's the most fun, in my opinion. It's the most well designed, and these are all just growing pains. I mean, LSS is a company that's been around for 6 years now, and they have to find a way to continue to grow the game, or else it just becomes stagnant. And so reprints are the way they're choosing to do it. And me as a vendor, I'm going to keep vending the game. I'm going to be in the game. My full-time job is selling fab cards right now as I save up money to open an LGS someday. And I have full confidence in them going forward. My livelihood is based on this. My family's livelihood is based on this game right now. And so I'm all in. And so that might be why I have some optimism. But I mean, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to change the way that I interact with the game. I'm just going to I'm not going to change my position in the game. I'm just going to adapt to what LSS is giving us, and I think that there's strong signs for growth in the future. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. I know this is a very divisive topic, divisive subject. There are lots of opinions in the game. Like I said, it's good for some people, it's bad for others, and overall we just have to have faith that LSS knows what they're doing, that they have the game's and the player's best interests at heart, and I think they do. And so that's just where I stand with it. I'd love to hear you guys' opinions in the comments. Thanks for watching my video, and I'm excited for spoiler season to come out next week.